Today I would like to speak about knowledge, uh, metrics on expertise in education at European level, and the role of sociology in this new landscape. Following knowledge has been produced by academics. Academics were organized according to peer regulation through research community. The hierarchy was determined by, of course, publication, but academic position, seniority. There was largely a collegial solidarity among the research community. This research community has not disappeared completely, but it has been largely undermined during the last decades by other modes and other producers of knowledge which challenge their vision and their capacity to develop knowledge from the states and from even international organizations. If we consider sociology, at the beginning, for example, in the UK, it was a sociology of a matter, a sort of club gathering people interested by studying social aspects, largely copying other sciences like biology. At the time, was other scientists was studying birds, and of course, they were concerned by welfare and by improving the condition of the poor. But the development of sociology is largely linked with the development of the welfare state and social surveys and the type of production of knowledge which was required by the welfare state in order to improve its governance of population. And it was the same for education, which was largely, and sociology of education, which was largely promoted through the development of quantitative surveys inspired from demographics, particularly in the UK, with the role the important role of the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, mixing biology, economics, eugenicism, and which was the roots of the development of the first reflection on sociology and the sociology of education. In France, with the creation of the Institute of Demographics, which gather data from surveys of inequality among students, it was the then trend, and Bourdieu used all this data bank to develop his first work on social reproduction. It was a time when the state was interested by the measurement of inequalities because the objectives was to raise the skills of people to occupy a position of technicians, engineers, middle-rank executives in order to serve the needs of the economic growth. So sociologists contribute to justified the extent of secondary education, higher education. At that time, economists was close to sociologists in promoting investment in human capital and justifying the expansion of higher education. So there was an objective alliance between economists and sociologists for providing knowledge to states in order to improve the governance of these people and transition between secondary education and higher education. I can say that knowledge, expertise, and policy were on the same side, and sociology could develop surveys on inequalities which were considered as useful for the progress of the society and the improvement of policy making. So what changed then? lots of things change since the economic crisis, the development of new right ideas, the collapse of the comprehensive school. I don't have much time to describe all this in this lecture, so I will more focus on what happened in terms of metrics. First, the US changed the condition of measuring inequalities. They develop and promote accountability mechanism. They influence the OECD in developing reflections on the evaluation of education systems and promoting international surveys. So we shift from a measurement of inequality of access to a measurement of inequality of outcomes. And it gave predominance to economists on one side and psychologists on the other side. Economists who change their theory, trying to explain and justify that international surveys, like the PISA surveys, was an interesting means and tool to measure the effectiveness and quality of education systems and the contribution of this education system to the economic growth. And you got psychologists on the other side who was able to develop their knowledge on the measurement of skills and the development of testing. So there was a new alliance between economists and psychologists to facilitate the development of accountability systems and evaluation of education systems. Now, the place of sociology was largely undermined by the fact that sociology has no equivalent, no capacity to compete with these two main disciplines. The rules of producing data and evidence have changed too. With the development of evidence-based research in education, the idea was to change the techniques of production of knowledge. So meta-analysis, randomized controlled trials was legitimized over traditional methods used in social sciences. And it gives rise to a new reflection about the production of knowledge, who cannot be more just an affair of academics, but a production of knowledge which has to be shared with other producers of knowledge outside the academic sphere. And this production of knowledge had to be associated with issues of dissemination and use of knowledge by professional and stakeholders. It has to be useful and relevant and serve utilitarian economic and social objectives linked to policy making. The development of digital technologies had an impact too in developing the capacity of policymakers to develop a sort of tracking of individual behaviors and cognitive representations, forcing professionals, educators, and students to fit to these new ways of producing information and knowledge in school and classrooms. So the professionals were subjected to new conditions of surveillance and work. At the same time, academics had to fit the new standards. What is the impact of this change at European level among member states, how it impacts on the way knowledge is produced and governed. First, the development of metrics give much importance to economists of education. One example of this is the creation of the European Network of Economists in Education by the European Commission. It is a network which presents itself as the think tank advising the European Commission on providing recommendations for European policy making. Of course, these economics defend the principle of evidence-based policy making and experiment through randomized controlled trials, but they are at the origin of the development of indicators of the open method of coordination, particularly the idea of measuring dropouts and measuring retention of students who are considering to measurement of effectiveness and quality of education system. At the same time, it allows budgetary arbitrages in terms of the conduct of education policies. At least the PISA survey is used by these economists as the barometer of the improvement of education systems and the improvement of the effectiveness and quality of these education systems. And we know that PISA has a strong impact and influence on decision making by policymakers in education. What is interesting is that psychology developed measurement of cognitive skills according to these international surveys, but nowadays the psychology is developing measurement of soft skills which challenge the condition of certification by diplomas and the evaluation of skills in education system, on which is largely supported, this policy of soft skills is largely supported by the European Commission. Soft skills are considered by economists a good means to foster innovation and creativity, not only in education system but in higher education system too. We can say we are moving to a sort of a previous dream, which was the dream of an experimental society. This idea emerged in the 60s with the idea that we could develop evaluation or measurement like in physics or in medicine, capable to produce the truth and to indicate the way of improving the governance of education systems. Metrics has also facilitated the emergence of expertise through international networks, through interest groups, agencies, consultancy groups, and of course a diversity of international organizations capable to use data, to use these metrics to provide short-term knowledge and useful knowledge to policy makers. For example, you've got the McKinsey group, which is able to gather the data and to produce benchmarks of education systems with recommendation of best practices for policymakers. You had in the US the creation of the evidence-based policy coalition in education, which were capable to influence the Congress and make the Congress taking decisions about the implementation of evidence-based education for academics and for professionals in schools. And it was largely influenced in persuading OECD to develop international programs, reports, and recommendation for evidence-based policy making, and the European Commission follow these trends, and currently the European Commission is providing reports promoting evidence-based policy making in humanities and social sciences. At least you've got the Educational Testing Service, which is an agency producing tests in the US, which has been capable to build a partnership with the association who launched the first international survey in mathematics. And this joint venture is using all the data of international surveys to provide expertise to European policymakers worldwide. So we can say that expert knowledge is more and more produced outside the academic research community. And it dismantles the traditional relationship between the academic community and the state. These transnational networks are capable to providing knowledge and to circulate knowledge to policymakers in addressing at the same time some recommendations in terms of best practices. And academics become, if they belong to the network or they involved in the network, they become knowledge workers, just only capable to provide short-term knowledge directly useful for policymakers and stakeholders. These metrics are particularly adjusted to the new welfare state. We don't have to forget that education with health was one of the pillars of the welfare state. And as I said in the introduction of this lecture, the welfare state needed some specific measurement in order to guide its policy, and it was largely based on the development of statistics and social surveys. It has been largely explained by through the works of Theodore Porter or Alain Desrosières. But with the move from the welfare state to the post-welfare state, the condition of the governance of the welfare has changed through the implementation of short-term programs, through programs who are targeting specific people, individual at risk, to develop diagnoses and prevention of at-risk people. So it changed the condition of metrics and measurements, opened the door for the people promoting evaluation inspired by the technologies of new public management or technologies inspired from the business, for example, the impact evaluation or impact assessment, quality audit, which has overcome the traditional statistic which was produced by social scientists. Today, risky behaviors like bullying, dropouts, immigrations, special needs, etc. are the signs by which the intervention of the welfare state is justified and administered. What is interesting is that instead of planning, instead of redistribution, and instead of producing statistics on this planning and redistribution, there's been a transfer from the state to the professional and individuals who are accountable about their behavior and the risk they take, and they have to justify their actions according to their individual responsibility to the state. So it changed profoundly the accountability mechanism, and it justified some new measurement which are introduced to evaluate this.